Someone took my books and I'm not mad. They took my backpack. Had everything in it. All my belongings, my laptop. Stuff I've been working on for over a decade. Documents of my direct experiences, my personal works, studies, and own philosophizings. And yet, I know that that's also part of me and stuck with me. And in some sense, you would have to be me to have any real ownership or property or originality to those things. There's no originality to something like that that's removed from somebody, and it loses its priceless value in some sense because of that interaction, and it corrupts it. But it doesn't corrupt the true, genuine message. In fact, it does quite the opposite. It causes a stir of virtue and exemplification of such, in that it's through those tribulations that we're tested the most, and we become our best character through the stepping forward of how we go about that encounter and that direct existential concern. A concern that if you're truly immersed in the enterprise, there's more fruits than you can imagine in what the future holds, because the works that you have made, which are most valuable, have already contributed the value and continue to contribute the worth and worthwhileness that stays and proliferates and is inextinguishable and immortalized through that process of oppositional forces that really tend to bring out what's most true in regards to a situation and the matter of fact of any particular case. Because why exactly would you have to go to so much thwartful efforts towards somebody else's consciousness, in which you would have to inflict a serious amount of harm to then deliberately lie about every single word, and it's coursing in directions that is oppositional to the actions in which you've obtained the catalyst of information that is completely orthogonal to the message, in which is being embodied by the thieves, in which are scoundrels of virtue. They take their strengths and make them weak by crippling their souls and corrupting their own powers towards a unsustainable discourse and direction, in which is purely egoistic in terms of an imbalanced ego that has become consumed by its own selfishness and blindness, in which it's predominantly stuck in this more subjectively true, must be subjectively true, as objectively true, but less objectively true in its physicalities, and in which it's constantly forcing a physicality of truth, or at least statements that are instantiated on top of what is perceived as actually and really the case, as a matter of fact and true, in terms of these definitions in which a person instantiates meanings that are obtuse to the actual genuine alignment and authenticity of a statement, not just the existence of what pertains to a matter of fact, but the alignment and the congruence of it in terms of what actually constitutes not just truth on one dimension, but on multiple dimensions, in which we can sense it and make sense of it, and do so through understanding the cogency, the coherence of a statement. Does it make sense? How it impacts our mind, and ultimately whether or not it's congruent with our direct experiences or past experiences, or what's conceivable in terms of what's possible and even probable. And when we understand the various dimensions of what authenticates something as genuine, true, as well as original, there's these certain intrinsic aspects that involve things like contingency, which require us to understand individual differences and the unique individuality of various processes and psychological dynamic elements and constituents, as well as individuals who are individually different, with individually different psychological minds and nervous systems and epigenomes that operate in concordance with the physicalities of their surrounds through the interweaving pathways that combine the psychological mind with the nervous system, and which cascade these sodium ion channels that have these constant energizing momentums that are deeply bound to the qualities of our experience, which, when we immerse ourselves in the time space in which we operate and which we must be functional in to exist at all and to make sense of anything, because functionality itself is a defining characteristic of whether or not something is not just true but exists, and exists as a matter of fact, and exists not just as a matter of fact but as a dynamical way of engaging meaningfully in the surrounds that's direct to our interests, but not just our interests, our purpose and our sense of purposefulness, and also the purposings of our subjective experiences, the qualias, the direct thought in that qualia, the qualia of the information within our processing of our own perceptions and are cognizant of it, which allows us to philosophize, and philosophize more authentically in terms of a way that validates what's stated, and not just the conjectures of the subjective mind, but in something in which all subjective experiencers could apprehend and understand the universal and objective elements and constituencies as the same across situations and characters that give it that objective substance and physical matter to it, a structure to it, not just a structure, a functional structure to it, a functional structure that has to be functional insofar as we can constitute truth, because the constitution of truth is functional. It presumes functionality. How else would you constitute anything? You need to have constituencies that work in operation with each other, and they have to not just work, they have to be operational, and not just operational, they have to also tend to move in a direction that tends to be expansive, dynamical, involves learning, that adapts to conditions in real time and pertains to living organisms rather than what is artificial and synthesized by the mind, and which we often forget is something that we have manufactured through our own intellectual capacities and innovations, that if we follow certain channels of thinking, we can easily fall off a summit in which we've hiked so long and exerted so much of our own efforts towards obtaining or achieving, or at least realizing a grandeur, in which, instead of recognizing the grandeur for its beautiful gaze of the land below and the sun that sends down the Cree pulsar beams through the cloud-like heavens of the sky, mystifying every aspect and cellular automaton of being through its opening up of all sorts of possibilities that tend to promote a genuine, ubiquitous, positive feeling in association with a mutually universalizing qualia that spans throughout the body in a sensorium of sensations and perceptions that are primarily mine and subjective, and which you can have your own sort of encounters with whatever sort of experience you would have on a mountain. But what I would experience there, I know, is directly mine through the individual qualia I have that is not yours, and is that way because of the laws of our physical and psychological existence that pertain to these dynamics that must be that way, in which the qualia of my gaze perceives something very unique in regards to distinct information that is not the same and that is individually different from your conscious experience and your psychological mind and your I as in a subjective experience, and your me as a body, a physical body, and a structure in which the consciousness is directly in relation and dynamical relation to, and which, when we ponder from that mountain, there are different ways we can paradoxically view what's to come and our position in relation to our own existence, and also the context of the longevity of it and our health in that regard, our psychological health, in which is the primary and preliminary source of our health, and the mode in which we engage every day in every experience, and where we make even the judgment at all to decide whether or not this is good or bad, or I like this or not. It's ultimately through that subjective experience that is most important for our health and our understanding of our own well-being, and our direct knowledge that keeps us aware and awake and alert and enlightened to individuals who might provide us misleading health information, or information that is presented in terms of being from an expert, by an expert who's showing the credentials of an expert, but who doesn't actually communicate anything that is of objective substance, or is more objective than what a person who makes statements about physical health and psychological health on the basis of their own philosophizings and preliminary philosophizings, but which has real substance and which actually confers a lot of psychological information that is true and directly applicable and functional and would provide benefit to others in the surrounds, in which, in comparison to the medical expert, would present a disparity in terms of who's the true expert. Because if what you're saying is more subjective than it is based in objective truth, and you're not engaged in the intellectual enterprise of truth seeking, insofar as we're defining that as moving towards a genuine interest to share more objective information in the context in which that would be constituted, and strictly so we don't limit and hamper or harm individuals, and also set a bad precedent for others by punishing freedom of expression where it's due and where it makes sense and where it's clearly plausible, such as if somebody's stating their opinion rather than something to be a particular law or a matter of fact, and also to give people the room to philosophize and correct their own error. In doing so, we illuminate others' minds by shedding light on the fallibility of even our greatest minds, and the potential for any individual to become even better, but also gooder in their pursuits of better conscience. And that's all I wanted to say for this video. Bye.